All right, hello everyone. Hello. We're gonna get started. I'm Trevor Power, the art gallery curator here at McHenry County College. I want to thank you all for joining us today for this artist talk with Olivia Zubko, whose work is currently up downstairs in Art Space 144. I'd like to thank the MCC Art and Design Department and Joe Sullivan, the Dean of Arts and Humanities, for their support in organizing this event. Special thanks also to Justin Schmitz and the Audio Video Production 2 class for setting up our Zoom recording this afternoon, which is both here and beamed out live across the world. I'm excited you're all here, and I'll start this by reading a short bio of Olivia. I'm delighted to introduce Olivia Zubko, a Chicago-based artist working primarily in sculpture with ceramics, fibers, and found materials. Olivia earned her BFA in sculpture from Northern Illinois University in 2020, and since then her work has been shown widely, including at DeGroot Fine Art, NADA Miami, the Bridgeport Art Center, and Rockford University, amongst many other places. She's currently a fellow at the Arts Club of Chicago. And Olivia's sculptures often draw from the everyday and the domestic, reimagining familiar forms in ways that feel both intimate and uncanny. If you'd please join me in welcoming Olivia Zubko.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out. I know some of you are here with the classes and have to be, but I'm glad you're here. Hi on Zoom. I'm Olivia Zubko. As Trevor said, I'm a Chicago-based sculptor. I am based out of this room here in West Humboldt Park in Chicago. This is my studio, my very, very messy studio. Sometimes it's less messy, but a lot of times it looks like this. Here's just a couple quick images of the show downstairs in case anyone hasn't seen it, or for the folks on Zoom who haven't seen it. I'm going to go way more in depth about some of the individual works and what it's all about, but just a little preview. Just a little bit about me. As Trevor said, I graduated from NIU in sculpture, but before that, I went to a community college, so I'm really glad to be here today at a community college. I love community colleges. I went to Harper College in Palatine. Sometimes I still go to Harper College in Palatine. Sometimes I still enroll in classes and in art classes and fire my work there. I also, in my day-to-day life, I'm a full-time artist, but I've got lots of different hustles that actually make me some money. So I work as a studio assistant for 4 different artists in Chicago. I work for a wonderful painter named Scott Stack, his wife, who's a fantastic ceramic sculptor, Allison Rutan, painter Cody Tumblin, and a sculptor named Mindy Rose Schwartz. So I love working with them. So I'm pretty much always in a studio, whether it's mine or it's somebody else's. I also just started teaching beginning ceramics at the University of St. Francis in Joliet, so that's kind of a fun new adventure for me. On the screen here, this is one of my other little side gigs that's very, very much a side gig, but it's probably one of the most interesting things I do, so I figured I'd share it. But so I've got this little job making artifact mounts for just a private antiquities dealer, so this is something that I also do, and I don't make the bases. A friend of mine makes the wooden bases, but then I do all the soldering and brazing for the little armatures, and then the faux finishing, the painting so that it blends in. So that's just kind of a side gig, but I thought I'd share it just because it's somewhat interesting. I'm also really involved with an arts program that's sort of Chicago-based, but sort of also Wisconsin-based, called the Acre Residency. So the Acre Residency, it's a nonprofit, and during the summer they have 3 2-week sessions where artists apply and then go there, spend 2 weeks at a time as kind of a cohort and make art. It's in the middle of nowhere, the absolute middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, in a place called Steuben. It's in the Driftless region, which is a really kind of interesting part of Wisconsin. It's very hilly, it's very beautiful, it's just kind of like idyllic pasture land. So I love going there any opportunity I get. So I've been volunteering with Acre for a few years, and in different capacities. So this isn't picture kind of me, a little bit of me. This past summer in July, I was up there as the ceramics tech for 2 weeks. So I kind of ran the ceramics department, but of course I also had some time to work on my own work. So here I am working on a mold. Also, when I'm there as the ceramics tech, I'll usually lead a workshop or two. These are some images from a wild clay workshop that I led. So there's a cool spot about a 10-minute drive from the Acre campus where there's a public boat landing, and then all like this whole pathway into the water, it's all clay. So here's my fun clay crew, or sometimes we call it the gloop group because it's very gloopy. So yeah, we were collecting some clay. And then that's a little mug that I made out of that clay, and that brown on the outside, there's no glaze on it at all. That's just the clay itself fired to cone 5. So that's a cool resource. It's a really fun thing that I like to do. I also help out with the aluminum pours. We've got some foundry equipment and a furnace, and we do aluminum pours, and we primarily do sand casting. So those little boxes that are on that bench that we're pouring into are sand molds, where you press the most basic way to explain it is you press an object, and that's your pattern, into an oil bonded sand that like holds the shape after you remove the object, and then you have to dig out pathways for the metal to go in. But and then I do want to point out this person who I'm pouring with. This is my very, very good friend, Paul Urshan. He's a fantastic artist. He is actually going to have a show here, 2027. It was supposed to be the next show after this, but because of the gallery renovation, it got pushed back a little bit. But wonderful artist. I owe him many debts of gratitude for getting me involved with Acre. He's also how I got that artifact job. He also just hired me to teach, so I owe him a lot. I have one pet. He's a 9-year-old leopard gecko named Neil. So that's Neil. He likes to hang out. I made the mistake years ago of taking one picture of him for Christmas. It was just a very basic picture of him with the Santa hat, and then now I can't not do it because people will get mad at me. So every year, it's an immense amount of pressure to outdo the year before. But I think this was the best year. So that's Neil. All right, so art. I make sculptures. Some of you have seen it in the gallery. You can see that there's some kind of common themes throughout the objects on the screen and from what you saw in the gallery. So generally, the work that I'm making now, that I've been making for the past 4 or so years, has been kind of thematically centered around the bathroom, or just kind of other sort of private domestic spaces. And I'm using a lot of cast copies. I do a lot of mold making, and I cast copies of fixtures and found materials to make these sculptures that sort of call upon a viewer's memories and associations with this very private and intimate space. Very interested in objects that are lived with and touched and kind of become extensions of the body in a way, and objects that are sort of tied to memories formed within these spaces. I just think kind of the bathroom is sort of psychologically a really complicated space, and there's so many associations a person can have with them. It can simultaneously and paradoxically be sort of a familiar, distant, public, private, intimate, safe, unsafe, sterile, or emotional space. It's really closely tied to daily ritual and personal intimacy and self-care. It can, objects and images of the bathroom can call upon viewers like visceral memories. Maybe something on here makes you think of being in a bubble bath as a child, or being very ill, or even just escaping to a bathroom during a social gathering for kind of a private moment. When I first started making this work, I had a friend say that she really connected with it because English was her second language growing up, and when she would get home from school, she would go into the bathroom and close the door and then practice her English in the mirror, and so that was like her very private space for, to kind of work on that part of her development. So but also, in addition to all of that, struggles with body image, dysmorphia, identity, and kind of just general development come to mind. Arguments in politics over who can use public facilities. So it's just kind of an endless number of associations that somebody could have. I mean, I've had people look at pieces and sort of think of the same thing. Like sometimes it's like, oh, that reminds me of my grandma's house. And then sometimes it's like, oh, that reminds me of my grandma's house, so it's so varied. And I think that's kind of what's interesting, that the viewer's kind of experience with the body of work is sort of just contingent on their own personal memories and their kind of own narratives. And I like to make these things somewhat vague and kind of open-ended. Maybe they invoke the sense of like a fragment or a memory or feeling. And then when I first kind of started working with these objects, I found that a lot of the objects sort of merge and interact with one of each other and sort of start to relate to a human form or kind of mirror the body. You kind of start to see parts become mouths or ears or fingers, things like that. So just kind of interested in making work that's sort of strange and awkward as the body itself. So these are some pieces that this was kind of the body of work that I was working on before. So I started with kind of the bathroom, domestic space kind of topics around in 2021. Prior to that, I was in school at NIU, and I was in my senior year, 2020, and then COVID happened. We went on spring break and never ever went back. So this was some of the last work that I made at NIU, and obviously it might kind of at first look very, very different than my more recent work, but I think I was still interested in a lot of the same sort of themes, objects that are really kind of intimate with the body, so like things that are worn. But I was also looking at it from this sort of pseudo-archaeological lens. A lot of the little objects that you probably can't see, like especially in this little cabinet or in that kind of column piece that I called a core sample, are objects that I actually found in my mom's basement. My grandma died long before I was born, but my mom has everything she ever had and made. She was a really prolific maker, crochet, knitting, and everything. She won like blue ribbons at the state fair. So we have all this stuff. And so I started kind of looking at it as sort of like I said, like a fake archaeologist, a total like dilettante. But really interested in sort of presenting the work in that way. So this was like probably like 2018, 2019 when I made these works. And then this is kind of what I was working on during the pandemic. Like I said, I kind of graduated, went on spring break, never went back, no longer had a studio. So I was home all day. I started making sweaters. I really liked crocheting. I had never really made anything wearable for myself, so I'd started making these sweaters, and I didn't really know what I was doing. So I ended up with a lot of like weird sweater bits or starts of sweaters that didn't fit the body right, and I don't know, I just didn't know what to do with them. I didn't want to pull all the yarn out, so they kind of just accumulated into a pile. So then once I had enough of them, I started making these sculptures. So these are actually ceramic sculptures. I use this process where I soak the fiber pieces, the crocheted pieces, in a porcelain slip, so like a liquid porcelain, and then shape it, form it, let it dry, and then fire it in the kiln. And then all of the fiber material burns out completely, kind of leaving this sort of fossil of the sacrificial piece. So yeah, I was working with these sweater bits, and I don't know, there was something, they're so like weird and pathetic. I like felt bad for them, so I was like, how do I kind of give them a body? They're never going to be worn, and so I started growing grass in them. So the images at the top are from a show I had at Heaven Gallery, where I showed those pieces. But yeah, so the being at home all day, not knowing what to do, making sweaters, like I was like, what do I do all day? So I got, into like more like self-care stuff, skincare. I spent a lot of time in the bathroom. It was like illegal to go outside. So what am I going to do? So that kind of got me into, the psychological landscape of the bathroom. And yeah, so I mentioned I do a lot of mold making. So a lot of these fixtures I find, I don't know, I'm always going to thrift stores, salvage stores. It's where I find most of this stuff. And then I can make molds of them so that I can make copies and manipulate them however I need to make these sort of forms. This is an image from my first solo show. It was in Chicago at a gallery called Cleaner Gallery and Projects. It just recently closed. The space is a new gallery, but under new management and a new name. But I was really, really happy, to have this opportunity. It was huge for me. After just sort of sitting at home for a long time. So that's my first show. Yeah, so these were some of the first pieces that I made in this sort of body of work. Another thing that I'm really interested in and always thinking about in my work, and if you've seen the titles of the pieces downstairs, Trevor made a nice reel on Instagram that kind of pointed out the titles with an extra piece of context, which I'll explain. But I'm really also interested in drawing reference from the long and expansive history of depicting bathers in art history and mythology. I mean, art history is just full of imagery of people bathing from ancient times till now. And I'm interested in kind of examining the voyeuristic and often objectifying nature and just sort of conflating historical depictions with modern sentiments towards private space and personal intimacy. So Diana and Actaeon come from a myth written by Ovid around like the year 8. And basically the way that myth goes is Diana was a demigoddess, and she was bathing outside in a body of water with her nymphs, and Actaeon was a hunter and kind of happened upon this scene and was like perhaps watching. But anyways, at some point, one of the nymphs saw him, and they all got startled, and Diana splashed water onto him, and because she's a demigoddess, she's got some powers, and that transformed him into a deer, and he ran off, and then he was eaten by his hunting dogs. So I've always loved these kind of grand mythological stories and even biblical stories as well, like Bathsheba. But yeah, so that's Diana and Actaeon. And then in the gallery, so this is also from that show at Cleaner, I sort of displayed it so that Actaeon was in the doorway. And like, I think one person was like, "Did you do that on purpose?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did." So I started working a little bit bigger to see what happens. I found they started looking really creature-ish, but ones that were on the wall sort of maintained more of like a fixture kind of look. When I would build larger, they would sort of become architectural, but still I was finding like really nice moments to highlight where things sort of looked like body parts and things like that. So I was really interested in that. This was a piece from that show, Necessarium, titled after this piece. So this is also porcelain, cast porcelain, and the actual embroidery exists in real life, but I didn't use that method of burning it out. I instead kind of made an impression of it into a clay slab and then made a silicone impression of that and then made a plaster mold from that so I could cast porcelain into that, because you have to use plaster for casting clay. But this term necessarium, so this was a piece that my grandma made, and I found it in the basement and was just like, what is this? And I was like, what is this word? I've never heard this word before. It sounds beautiful. What is it? And I found out, like, I've always known from, my mom that my grandma had such a really sharp Southern sense of humor. And the word necessarium, it's a very fancy word for the bathroom. So this would have hung on the bathroom door. But it was just like, it was, the necessarium, right? It's just, I needed to sort of set it in stone and make it, permanent. And I don't know, it needed to be porcelain, right? Here's an image of that mold I was telling you about. So the color that is in the lettering, in the stitches, is underglaze, which is a paint that can get fired onto clay. Any other kind of regular kind of paint would just burn off in the kiln firing. So I use underglaze, and I actually found the best method was to paint it directly into the mold before I pour the liquid clay into it, and then it transfers. So just a little behind the scenes. So this piece is in the show. Downstairs. This is not an embroidery that my grandma made. This is also a cast porcelain piece, but this was one that I found at the thrift store that I love the phrase. It's just timely forever. It was just kind of peculiar. Like, why did they use so many exclamation points? I don't know. I think I just loved everything about it. So just like the same logic, I had to make it permanent. I had to make it ceramic. Ceramic is forever. And then, like I said, I was really kind of interested also in the way that some of these forms mimic the body. So I started kind of taking that a little bit more literally and kind of making these busts, where the mirror is the face and the viewer can sort of become part of the piece and the viewer can be the piece in a way. And more kind of titles related to mythology. Hygeia is a goddess of hygiene and cleanliness and health, and Panacea is like a goddess of healing and curing, and they're both daughters of the god of medicine, Asclepius, doesn't matter. And then this is a more recent piece, it's also in the show, and I kind of revisited Hygeia and kind of made a more elaborate cast. So also porcelain, and then the mirrors are found, of course. Those aren't ceramic. I'm glad you're laughing because it's a stupid piece of art. So this actually, okay. I've always just thought, like, you've heard the trope of ideas coming to people in a dream. Like, I think, like, supposedly Frankenstein came to Mary Shelley in a dream, and songs came to Paul McCartney in dreams, and I think James Cameron has come up with movie ideas, and it's so cheesy, and it's such a trope. But I was also like, why don't ideas ever come to me in a dream? This is like, this sucks. Like, I need ideas. I'm an artist. And then it finally happened once and only once, and my subconscious came up with the dumbest sculpture you could really imagine. So this is also ceramic. So just in the dream, it was very vivid, and I was working towards a show, and it was really last minute, and I like had to make this piece work, and it had to be this giant scrub daddy. So this is like actually oversized. The scrub daddy is about this big in real life, and I remember in the dream, it came out of the kiln the day that the show opened and made it on the wall, and launched my career. Whatever. It was so stupid, but it was like so stupid I had to make it, right? So I did. So that's that piece. But it was also funny because it does kind of fit thematically with the rest, even though it's a silly one. And then of course I just kind of ended up making another variation equally as stupid. I don't know. I love it. But yeah, so porcelain, same method of dipping the towel, dipping the sponge into stained batches of slip, so colored clay. So that's actually the color of the clay. It's not like painted. And then, so yeah, there's no actual fiber in there at all. They're horrifyingly fragile.
What does that create in the firing though, the burning off?
A lot of smoke, so you can't do it inside. When I was making a lot of that work, I had access to kilns that were outside, so that could just it's nasty. Don't do it here. Just some more pieces. Yeah, 2022, 2023. These are actually from this image is from a show that I had with my friend Chris Kosnowski over there. Hi, I'm so glad you're here because I wouldn't want to talk about this show without like calling you out and saying what a big fan I am. But got this opportunity to show with Chris at Rockford University. That's curated by Ari Norris, who's the gallery director there, and it was just, such a perfect match. And it's like, I knew it was going to be, but once we had the work in the gallery and like saw the way we used so many of the same colors, I just loved the show. It was such an honor to show with Chris. Here's another one, Chris's painting in the center. Yeah, I love this show. These were also in that show. I was kind of interested in making just these more kind of wall relief type things that sort of look like pieces of wall kind of excavated from, construction. Also, like these titles here, so I'm not always pulling from mythology and things like that, but sometimes I find words that sort of cross over and mean two things. So lippage, you kind of think of like lips on your face, but lippage is also the term for when you have like install tile and it's not like even and there's parts that stick up, that's lippage. Vitreous is also like it refers to sort of something being glass-like, but it's also the word for like the goo that's in your eye. This word's not like body related. It just means ceramic that's been fired twice. It's usually used in the tile industry to describe tiles that have been like fired and then glaze fired. But it sounded like a place to me, and this sort of became this like landscape of icebergs, and it's that kind of a horizon and these sort of waves, and it just was dramatic and needed kind of a dramatic name. This was also in that show at Rockford. This was just a piece that I really liked. These were some goofy ones that were in a show in California. These names, I think I was just scrolling through Home Depot's catalog, and these names, Cadet and Champion, were the names of like two different types of toilet that like American Standard offered on their line. So you could buy the Cadet, you could buy the Champion, but it was kind of like, okay, this one's sort of saluting, this one's kind of like raising its hand up as kind of a champion. So that's where those titles are coming from. This was sort of an experiment. I really like this piece. I haven't really made more like it, but using the fixtures, but then giving it this surface that's totally at odds with the form. It's kind of an experiment.
Is that a strontium glaze?
It is, yeah, strontium crater. Yep, with cobalt. Why is this in here? Oh, well, so, another pastime of mine sometimes is just going on YouTube and watching videos of like toilet factories. These images are absolutely wild. Like, nobody should work in these conditions. They were just the most horrifying working conditions you can imagine, like dry sanding without respirators, like no one was wearing shoes. But it's at the same time, it's amazing seeing all this stuff being made by hand. Because I feel like there's like, with ceramics, there's this big divide between like art and industry, and neither side of that ever thinks of the other. So that's another thing that I'm always thinking of, just like these utilitarian objects that we sort of take for granted, but may have been made by human hands.
You need to do a residency at Kohler.
Yeah. Yep, would love to. This was a thing that I saw. This isn't a sculpture. I saw this out in real life in the bathroom at a bowling alley, and then I like thought about it for a couple years because I was like, did I make that? No. But then I did. So this was actually a fountain. So I had it kind of rigged up with plumbing behind the wall so that It was like really truly jerry-rigged, so that this rag would just drip down into this bucket, and it would collect in the bucket and then be sent back up. But I couldn't find a pump like crappy enough to make it drip. So there was like just a clamp like cutting off the water, so it would just like dribble. It's kind of like an anti-fountain. You think of fountains as something so elegant, but this is not that. These are some images from a show that I did in New York. It was kind of a unique show. Obviously, this doesn't look like a gallery, and that's because it's a closet in a house on Governor's Island, which is an island like off the tip of Manhattan that I think was sort of military run. Like it was military housing at some point, but now there's sort of historical homes, and there's lots of arts programming on the island. You can only get there by ferry. I did drive there from Chicago with my friend Ari. I showed, so this was with Cleaner Gallery, and the way this show worked is galleries would apply to represent one artist and apply to this organization called NADA, the New Art Dealers Association, I think, yeah. And then they would select, and so everyone who got in, every artist and gallery got a room in the house. And so I've got the little closet under the stairs, which I was delighted for. That was like the best possible space I could have gotten. So just want to point out this washcloth stack. I've made a few of these. So yeah, so the same idea with burning out all the washcloths. I don't think I mentioned at the beginning, but I started doing that because I was really interested in the way that it mimicked the natural process of petrification, where like one material entirely becomes another material under kind of tremendous stress. Yeah, I just kind of like think of these washcloths as sort of existing in this sort of uncanny perpetuity of private domestic ritual. So it's sort of like fixed in this moment at the precipice just before like being stacked too high and toppling. It might be hard to tell in the pictures, but it's like it's kind of leaning, you know. So it's like in this moment right before it tips over. And then also thinking about the way that the washcloths are objects that like are so intimate with the body on a daily basis, but through this process become almost too fragile to touch at all. So it kind of just serves as this monument to domestic labor and like the objects that sort of bear witness to our private lives. I also refer to these pieces as cairns, which is kind of it's the word for like stacks of stones. Different cultures have like different meanings for stacking stones. It's kind of a meditative thing, but I kind of thought of like folding as sort of this kind of meditative practice. Here's just a view from the hallway. So my work was in that little closet, and that's what the house looked like. A little behind the scenes image. This is actually a different one. This isn't the one that was in the closet, but a little behind the scenes of how it's actually made. So I dip them all individually in batches of colored porcelain, and then I kind of do it. I prep that off first, and then I start stacking them, and it's extremely labor intensive. The last time I made one, I like injured myself. Like my wrists just didn't work anymore because you have to like really work the clay into the fibers and wring them out, and it was like 50 of those, and I like couldn't use my hands for a while. It was horrible. Pretty heavy because it does end up essentially being kind of solid clay. I don't know, I mean not like outrageously, but it probably weighs like 15 to 20 pounds, and of course is extremely fragile.
Together or individually put it together?
It's fired together. So I dipped them separately, but then while they were still pretty wet is when I did all this stacking. And then you see I have all these little boards propping it up because when they're wet, they're really strangely slippery. So if you take your eyes off of it while it's drying for like too long, you'll come back and it's just on the floor, and then I have to restack. Been through that a few times. This is a piece that's in the show downstairs, and also some behind the scenes images of the making of that. This is at that acre residency here. This is me. So it's this really nice outdoor kind of bare bones studio situation, but it's really nice to work in. This is the mold that I made to make the little stool that it sits on, so that's also ceramic. But yeah, same idea. So I made a clay ball over, I used like an inflatable rubber ball and covered it with slabs of clay, and then covered that with dipped washcloths. Another piece from the show, some behind the scenes. So this is what that mold looks like. So it's actually flat, and then I pour in the liquid clay and it sets up for a while, but when it's still soft, I took it out, and then I kind of built this sort of jig, kind of a sling to lay it in so that it would have that curve, and then sit up against a wall. This is just wild to me. This is just how much it shrinks in the firing. I just thought, clay people might, yeah, it's porcelain, exactly, yeah. Another piece from the show, so I mentioned like the bathers thing. This piece is titled The Three Graces, and the Three Graces are these kind of characters, I don't know if that's the right word, but these sort of symbols throughout mythology and art history, and there's just like an endless number of paintings and sculptures of them, but they're always in this arrangement where they're kind of almost dancing, they're kind of connected, they're very graceful and beautiful. They're, the daughters of Zeus, and they symbolize beauty and joy and abundance, and so this piece comes from classical antiquity. I think it's at the Met. It's a Botticelli painting and a Raphael drawing. So I was just kind of thinking, I was thinking of them when I made this and made these three. They're like a cast of, like, have you ever seen this little stool from IKEA? It's just a little, little stepping stool that a child would use to reach a sink. And then I also, in a lot of pieces, use this chain and use these poles, because I like the way, I just like the way that it drapes. I like the playfulness of it, but I like that it's that ball chain. So it's all these little, like this strand of balls, and I just sort of like the way that it almost sort of invokes the sense of like dripping water. So I mentioned about bathers and bathers in art history. I'm not an art historian. If there are any in the room, chime in if I'm saying anything horribly stupid. Art history is full of people taking baths. They've always been this sort of celebrated and perhaps fetishized trope throughout Western art history since ancient times. Usually kind of depicted as this humble subject, whether in a tub or a basin or an outdoor body of water, and they served as this sort of muse above all the rest. Many mythological and biblical tales involve bathers. Many painters have depicted those stories. So here's some paintings. I mentioned that story of Diana and Actaeon, that's here. Bathsheba. Of course, you have the birth of Venus. She's always kind of depicted as coming out of this shell. The shell. I've been using shells a lot in the work because they, have, kind of reflect female anatomy and represent sort of rebirth and fertility and things like that. Just bathers all throughout the ancient world, because bathing was such an important ritual, and it was, often done communally in Roman baths. And then, all throughout classical antiquity, and then in the Middle Ages, there weren't really many non-religious bathing scenes. It was mostly baptisms, right? And then into the Dutch Golden Age, it's just this theme that has just persisted and permeated through it all. Let's see, some more getting into sort of more contemporary, you kind of notice that throughout these images that I'm showing, there's this, some of them are kind of creepy, right? There's very much this spectrum of voyeurism and kind of almost perversion to just a celebration of the human form. And I think that line is kind of blurry, and that's kind of interesting to me. So you definitely kind of get a sense that some of these painters are sort of using the bather as a trope, and it's maybe kind of gratuitous and making like a voyeur of the artist or the viewer. And of course, overwhelmingly female subjects. Not always. Cézanne did a bunch of male bathers, so it's not always female, but largely, of course. And then into like more contemporary art, you've got this painting by Frida Kahlo, and of course, so you have a bathing theme done by a woman, and it's it's much more introspective. It's about kind of her childhood and reflecting on the sadness of like the events in her life. So you see all these events in the water. And of course, like Hackney pool paintings are kind of this twist on the bathing theme. This you might not be able to see really well, but this was an installation at the Venice Biennale a few years ago, and this was, I think, the Lithuanian Pavilion. Anyways, it was these artists with names that are completely unpronounceable to me. I'm sorry, but they'd created this installation and hired performers to perform this opera. So the viewers are around here on this sort of gallery, so everyone's looking down, and they've filled this room with sand, and it's basically like a scene of people at the beach, but they're also, throughout this durational performance, they're singing, and it's an opera, and I've always found that pretty interesting. This was actually me 5 days ago at the Philadelphia Art Museum. I found more bathers. These are some from the Art Institute. I mean, it's just like, I can never have too many. I'm going to kind of speed up because I'm actually running out of time. This was a piece that I made that I called Bather. It's the actual object itself is a cast of one of those like suction cup inflatable pillows for the bath. And it's cast from a mold of a piece that I actually like had in the bath with me as a child. But anyways, this is it sitting on a Picasso, also titled Bather. I hate this sculpture so much. This sculpture is at Harper College, and I don't know, it's just so brutish and so horrible, and I just thought they were kind of hilariously juxtaposed. You have like the ceramic, which is like strangely kind of supple and almost skin-like, and then what in the world, Picasso? This is another piece using that same object, but kind of differently. This title, Venus Anadyomene, this is a term for those images of Venus coming out of the water on the shell being born. So this is kind of Venus coming out of the water. Image of the mold. This was kind of an experiment in using this iron oxide transfer process where you kind of use a decal that you apply to the clay, and you actually fire the image on. I can answer more questions about that later if any ceramics people want to know more about that. But yeah, so you can kind of see this very murky image of a statue of Venus. These ones are kind of more simple. I kind of like the way that these two forms together kind of invoke like a weeping eye or a weeping breast. They're sort of body-ish. This one was a bit playful. I was kind of using this mirror as, it's kind of becoming a landscape, and I have these two cranes that are sort of dancing with each other on this body of water, and then the mirror is sort of like the moonlight in the background. There's another piece. It's a cast of like the flapper inside of a toilet, but it's also just so strangely body-ish, like almost cervical. Yeah, the title, that's like a goddess of pleasure and pleasure, enjoyment, delight, daughter of Eros and Psyche, and that's the word is the root of the word hedonism. There's a few of these in the gallery downstairs. These are sort of just color studies. Again, they're these burnt out washcloths, and I just kind of like the way that they're playfully on the wall. So I'm going to talk about just a couple like interesting recent shows as quickly as I can before we get to questions. But so this one was earlier this year. The gallery was a Tacoma pickup truck. I was invited to participate in this. I love a whimsical show, and this was certainly that. But basically, these two folks built this insert for a pickup truck that creates like a little sculpture park. So they invited me to make a miniature for it. So I made this little fountain. I don't know how easily you can tell that there's water coming out of this pipe and sort of bathing the bird. And it's just, this was, you know, a silly one, of course, but I like a silly one every now and then. This is a show that I was in over the summer. It took place both in Chicago and the Maldives simultaneously. So there were 2 shows, and there were 14 artists in each. The same 14 artists were in both shows. And this gallery in Chicago, The Plan, partnered with this gallery in the Maldives to make an exchange. So there were 7 artists from Chicago and 7 from the Maldives, and we were partnered sort of like pen pals. In the gallery in Chicago, I made a piece, and then I took photos of that piece, wrote a statement, and then I sent the image and the statement to my counterpart in the Maldives, who then made a piece and sent it to Chicago. So these are those together. So this is the piece in response to my washcloth stack. And then vice versa. So then I got an image and a statement from an artist in the Maldives, and then made a piece and shipped it there, kind of in response to theirs. These are images of the show in the Maldives. So this is the image that I received. And this artist was sort of depicting, in a very layered, kind of chaotic way, their kind of daily walk, and how it's sort of like the walk is seemingly peaceful but can kind of be chaotic at the same time. There's like many people sharing the streets. There's chickens. And so we kind of made this drawing in this very interesting layered way. And then this is the piece I made in response, which looks very different, but I really kind of connected with that layered way of thinking about sort of a daily walk or commute. I thought about, like, I drive all the time. I'm always driving. So I thought about the rear view mirror and how you can kind of simultaneously see ahead and behind you at the same time in this kind of layered way. And I also used an image transfer. It's really kind of hazy to see, but you can see like actually an image of my eyes in it. This was a recent show that I had at the Arts Club of Chicago. I'm in the fellowship program there, so it was something that I applied to. I've been very grateful for it, and so I get to attend like some really cool lectures and events through part of the fellowship. But I was also given this opportunity to show some work in their garden area over the summer. This was about a month ago. So I had some sculptures. They might be kind of hard to see, but I've got some sculptures here. But then I also had some friends act as performers to sort of disperse throughout the garden area and kind of act as though they were at home doing their sort of personal care routine. So this was really fun. And of course, like, there's just people walking by on the street very confused, and I love that. That's part of it. And, you know, it kind of connects back to the sort of voyeuristic nature of you know, depicting bathers in works of art. So this was a really fun show. So some more performers, and then, you know, people, of course, could walk throughout the garden and see it. The work on the left is downstairs, but it was also in this show as well. So those are just a couple more pieces. I know, like, my 45-minute timer went off, but I have like 1 more minute. This was 5 days ago. So this was a show in Philadelphia. It's a 3-person show with Elliot Doty and Danny O'Brien, and they're both really wonderful artists who I'm a big fan of. But they also kind of deal with these sort of domestic landscapes and the bathroom. This, you can see, this is like a bathroom stall door and like a shower wall with the grab bar. Those are by Elliot. And then this one and this one and this one on the shelf are Danny. Yeah, and then here's a couple other images of pieces from the show. So again, using this image transfer process. I made a mold of like, it's kind of one of those like orthopedic, like hemorrhoid donut pillows. I just think they're such an interesting, funny object, kind of made to sort of mold itself to the body and, heal you, make you feel better. And I just, so I juxtaposed this image into it that I took a few years ago. This was like peak pandemic. When I took this picture, I hadn't made any of the work in this PowerPoint yet. I was at home during COVID, sad all the time, wanting to make ceramics again. So I think that's it. So any questions? Does anyone want me to go back and talk more about anything? Open it up.
That art club in Chicago, what's the location of that?
It's in Streeterville, so it's on Ontario, like a block east of Michigan Avenue. Yeah. And so they do have programming and a gallery open to the public during weekdays, but it's also kind of a member-based organization as well. So there's like additional, programming if you're a member. But they have a public gallery and they put on really, really amazing shows there. It's a really fantastic institution with a really fascinating history, which I won't get into unless anyone is really interested. We could talk later. Yeah. What's up, Matt?
Hey, forgive me for not knowing a ton about ceramics, but I was curious as for the daddy.
Yeah.
Is the hey daddy and yeah daddy?
Yeah. Yeah, you got it.
Were those assembled together, like, so was the sponge
Yes.
put together later, like they were made separate and put together, as well as the thumbtacks?
Wait, well, so yeah, they were, all right. So the part of it that you can't see is that I did actually build it I like rolled a slab of clay that sort of supports it from the back. But yeah, so I dipped that towel and formed it. Then I dipped the scrub daddy, the sponge, and then attached it while it was wet. And then same with the thumbtacks; those were cast in a separate mold, and then attached. And then it was all fired together. So it is like one piece fired together. They weren't assembled after. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think I saw you first, and then.
So I really loved your presentation. It was
Thank you.
very beautiful work. So
Thank you.
I was wondering, it's very interesting how you present like the bathroom in your work. So me personally, I have always thought the bathroom is like the scariest room in a house. It's, like,
Yeah.
really scary. But I relate a lot to you kind of focusing on that as a space in your art because I really like bedrooms. Like I draw people sleeping all the time. I think of like my bedroom as like that's my little like special space that is like safe. Are there any other rooms in a house that you feel strongly about, or you think, oh, that room, like a living room, is really scary, or a kitchen? Or
I don't know.
One you like a lot, even also.
That's a really interesting question because for me, I just when I think of all the rooms in the house, I think of the bathroom as being kind of the most like weirdly emotionally charged, but definitely the bedroom. I mean, I'm such a homebody. Sometimes I love the bedroom, and also that's another place with like an endless number of associations that you can have with it. Yeah. But yeah, the bedroom I think would be the second choice. But then also like outside of the house, like when I made the piece with the rear view mirror, I also think about the car as kind of an interesting like mobile private space. And then also I guess the other thing about the bathroom that's interesting is that it's a private space within a private space if it's the one in your home, and that's kind of fascinating. It's kind of layered. Yeah.
I wonder, loved your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And the narrative. I wonder, who were some ceramicists that you inspired you as a younger person?
Oh no, that's such a scary question for me because I think it's like I was always in the sculpture side of things, so it's like I don't know that many ceramic artists. I was always into sculptors. The first one that's maybe obvious that comes to mind is Robert Gober, we didn't really work in ceramic, but like kind of similar strange, body associations. I'll have to think. I know I'd be able to think of some ceramic artists, but on the spot it's tough. But yeah, just kind of anything that's sort of nuanced and symbolic. It always I connect with. Yeah.
So on all the bathroom sculptures,
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that there are numerous pieces that appear over and over.
Yeah.
How many different chunks, or different objects are molded in that you use over and over again?
Well, you're right. So I do use them over and over again, and the molds that I make, I can cast as many as I want. So sometimes I make a mold and make a piece, and then years later I come back and use that, figure out a different way to use it. But that's kind of what's fun about it for me is, okay, if I cut it in this way and attach it in this way, it kind of gives it an entirely different context or kind of feeling, or maybe it reflects a different part of the body or something like that. But I can make basically an infinite number of them if I keep the mold or I keep the original object, and I can make a mold of it again.
Different molds are there, approximately?
That I've made.
For the toilet stuff.
Oh gosh, I've made so many.
More than a few.
More than a few. I've made a lot. I mean, thousands probably not, but hundreds perhaps. And I tend to hoard them and keep them because, like, my dirty secret is that I actually hate making molds. I hate mold making, but I love using molds. So I keep them around even if I don't know if I'm going to use them again, because I don't want to have to make them again if I realize later that I want to use that, replicate that object again. But yeah, I've made a lot of molds. And actually, in this image, you can see this is actually the first and only time I had the space. I've always wanted to do it, but I actually displayed. These were all of the molds that I used to make all of the pieces in this show. So I don't know, it just kind of, they worked perfectly on this one little concrete slab. But yeah, I'd always wanted to show the molds with the pieces because they're, sort of interesting, and it's sort of this, hidden labor behind the work. So, yeah. Anybody else?
I think that's probably a good
That's,
point to
that'll do it.